So Don Hall, thank you for joining us in the Local Food Summit. It's a pleasure to have you with us and to bring in the perspective from Transition US. And before we start, it would be great if you could give us a little a background on your own journey, your own trajectory that led you into this work.
Okay, great. It's great to be here with you, Michael. And yeah, I guess my journey, the short version of the story is that it began with an awareness of climate change and global warming and getting involved in volunteer efforts here in Sarasota, Florida, around the Sarasota Network for Climate Action, and really feeling this as a calling. But only being able to do so much as a volunteer and deciding to go back to school, do a master's in environmental leadership at Naropa University in Boulder, Colorado, and stumbling into an internship with you and with what was called Boulder County Going Local at the time.
And what year was that?
That was early 2008.
2008,
and I
yeah.
remember one of the first things I worked with you on was the application to be recognized as the first official transition initiative in North America.
That's right, yeah.
So
wow, that's a long time ago now.
It certainly feels like it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And yeah, just really connecting with transition as a positive, constructive approach to these issues instead of just marching and protesting against or solely working on the policy side of things.
Yes.
What we could do to come together in communities and start creating the change we want to see now.
Yeah.
So being really inspired by that and working with you for a couple of years and then moving back here to Sarasota, Florida to start Transition Sarasota.
Mm-hmm. And my understanding is that after a while, food became a major focus for Transition Sarasota.
Yeah, very much so. It became the main focus for Transition Sarasota for a number of reasons that I'll probably talk about later.
Yeah.
But also inspired by the work that you were doing in Boulder County and seeing the importance of really focusing in on one particular area to being able to make a deep impact in that area rather than kind of spreading ourselves very thin. So we really focused in on local food here.
And over the years, you have become increasingly involved in Transition US.
Mm-hmm.
You've been a trainer, and now you're working at a more organizational level with Transition US. So it would be great if you could, give us an idea of where is the transition movement in this country gotten to, and how does that relate to what's happening with transition in the rest of the world, for instance?
Yeah. Well, there's 160 official transition initiatives in the United States. I don't know what the number currently is internationally, but there's literally thousands of transition initiatives all over the world, in more than 50 countries. And this is really just since 2005, 2006.
Yeah.
I think particularly here in the United States, a lot of initiatives, not all initiatives, but a lot of initiatives are still stuck in the very early stages of the transition process for a wide variety of reasons that we could talk about here. But one of the things that I'm noticing is the need for a kind of clear and realistic pathway for the initiative to evolve over time. And I think that's something that people are starting to feel all over this country. And this summer in St. Paul, Minnesota, we're going to be having our first national gathering. And the theme of that gathering is broadening, deepening, and scaling up
Hmm.
recognizing this need for the transition initiative to evolve. So I think we're really at a pivotal moment in the movement here in the US, where transition initiatives have been around in the US now for, in some cases, 8, 9 years,
Right.
and seeing the need to continue to evolve to uh, higher levels of complexity and impact.
So 160 initiatives and thousands around the world. Yeah. And so can you give us maybe an insight into what's happening, for instance, in the UK and Europe with transition? What does it look like there?
Yeah, I think we tend to see some bigger projects in the UK, particularly where they got started first, but also throughout Europe. And there's many possible reasons why that is. That there's more community cohesion, that their infrastructure
Mhm.
was designed pre-fossil fuels, um, that their political situation is very different than ours here in the United States. But there are some amazing things happening in the UK, particularly in England. Community currencies that are now accepted by local government as payment for taxes. You can use them to ride the bus. The mayor takes his full salary in this community currency, the
Huh.
Bristol pound. There's community energy co-ops that are going gangbusters over there,
Mm.
where transition initiatives are raising millions of pounds at a clip to put large solar arrays on project housing. In Totnes, where the movement started, there's a community redevelopment effort that's turning a derelict industrial park into a sustainable business incubator.
Ah.
So we're seeing some larger projects like that happening in the UK. There's some great projects happening here in the United States as well, but they're not really on that scale yet.
Mhm. And at the same time, the United States is a crucial country in the global effort towards localization, because we have, what, 5% of the world's population and are contributing, I forget the numbers now, but it is the majority of greenhouse gases, for instance. So we really need this to happen here in this country.
We do.
Yeah. So as you've learned from your on the ground experience there in Sarasota about the importance of localizing our food supply, my impression is that this has been working in your mind, is and learning how to discover a process to begin to localize our food supply.
Mhm.
And it would be great if you could share that with us, what you've been learning, what you're seeing for the future, all of
Mhm.
that.
Yeah, so something I've been really concentrating on in recent months is a model that comes from the Transition Companion, a book that was written by the founder of the transition movement, a permaculture teacher named Rob Hopkins. And in it, he lays out 5 stages for the development of the transition initiative. And I think this model has been largely overlooked up to now.
Uh-huh.
The Transition Companion also offers something like 46 ingredients and more than a dozen tools for transition. So the complexity of it is a little bit bewildering at first glance, but if we really boil it down to its essence, which is these 5 stages, I think you find something that's really useful, not just for transition initiatives, but for anybody engaged in local food shed work.
Mhm.
And I certainly found that to be true in my work with Transition Sarasota.
So would you like to eh, elaborate on the model? Show us, give us a peek.
Yeah, yeah. So I'll start with a quote from the Transition Companion and Rob Hopkins that I think sums up this organic journey of the Transition Initiative and of local food system building. He says, a journey from one place to another can take a number of different routes, but will usually pass through a series of distinctly different landscapes. You don't necessarily notice when you leave one and enter another, but there are moments when you realize you are in a very different place.
Mm.
The transition journey is similar. You find that you move from raising awareness, showing films and trying to interest people, to noticing that you seem to have created an organization that has very different needs than those it had originally. And then later starting to think about what new businesses and infrastructure your community needs. Each stage is like finding yourself in a distinct landscape.
Mm-hmm.
And so this framework of the 5 stages that I'm going to talk about was not something that Rob Hopkins theorized from an armchair somewhere in Totnes, but was rather a process that emerged from the experience of hundreds of transition initiatives all over the world. The companion was actually written together with practicing transition leaders from all over the world and is based on their experience. So in that sense, it really is an organic journey. This is how it unfolds. This is not just a theory. And I think it's very helpful in showing how each stage builds upon the last and depends upon the last. So it's not a completely linear process of steps where you finish one step and then you completely move on to the next one, but each transcends and includes the previous stages. So there are 5 stages in this framework. The first one's called starting out. The second one's called deepening. Third one is connecting. The fourth one is building. And the fifth one is daring to dream. And the 5th stage, daring to dream, is more speculative. It's about the really big picture of what it might look like if our wildest dreams for transition and food localization came true. The stages 1 to 4 are really particularly relevant for people who are engaged in local efforts, whether those be specifically transition or local food focused in general. And the temptation is to try to skip from 1 directly to 4. That we want to move straight into the building process, doing these really big things that most of us local food shade catalysts dream of doing. That
Right.
we want to rebuild local food distribution systems. We want to train up hundreds of new farmers and put tens of thousands of acres of agricultural land into organic production. But particularly if you're starting at the place where most transition initiatives start at, which is a place of having very few resources at our disposal.
Mm.
These are mostly volunteer groups that come together. They don't have any prearranged funding, and they're basically bootstrapping their way up to greater impact. So if we start in that position, we need to build those resources over time, and not just financial resources, but human capital, social capital in our communities. And that starts with the starting out stage, aptly named. So I'm going to go through the 5 stages briefly, talk
Great.
about what the essence of each stage is, what are some of the key components, and then relating it to my experience with Transition Sarasota doing local food work. So hopefully it will be relevant to not just people in transition initiatives, but anybody who wants to help grow their local food system. And we do that by starting out. And the essence of this stage, from my perspective, is trying out your ideas and seeing what sticks. So we come to this work because we're inspired, because we have a vision for how things can be different. And we're going to go and try out those ideas. We're not going to get caught in analysis paralysis. We're not going to be afraid of making mistakes. But we're going to get on with this work and learn by doing. And I think here transition really shows its roots in the permaculture movement, which has as its first principle, observe and interact. So that's really what's happening with transition efforts, local food efforts in this first stage.
It also reminds me of what Chris Martenson used to say, that the most important thing to do is anything, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Start.
Yeah. I mean, I know from doing this work myself that I've learned so much more from doing it than I ever could by reading books or watching documentary films. Those were very helpful for the initial inspiration to give ideas, but really getting down to the nitty-gritty of how this happens, you have to get started in doing it.
So what kinds of things are people doing then to start? What does that look like?
So oftentimes it's forming an initiating group of some sort. We can't do this by ourselves. We need to bring together like-minded people who are going to work with us and start to develop this. But the word initiating really signals that at each stage, the organization that is underpinning this work may need to shift and evolve itself. Mm-hmm. So the people who are involved in the beginning may not be the same people that are involved at later stages.
Right.
So bringing together people, and I think, as you always said, Michael, raising awareness is job number one.
And it's never done.
And it's never done. So there's already some understanding in the wider community about the need for food localization, the problems with our global industrial food system. But we have yet to really feel the urgency for that. Yes. And we've also really yet to understand the magnitude of the potential benefits that might come from relocalizing our food supply. So oftentimes local food is thought of as a niche product, as the province of rich white folks, and it is so much bigger than that. And I think by raising awareness, we begin to cultivate that awareness in others that this is of prime importance and that this is something to pay attention to and to get involved in. So that's a lot of what's happening in this first stage. There's also some partnering, launching a few small projects, and in Transition Sarasota, the main things we did to raise awareness at an early stage was giving talks to all sorts of groups, from the Sierra Club to the Kiwanis Club. Screening lots of documentary films on different aspects of the local food shift, and offering reskilling workshops to train people up in some of the key skills we'll actually need to transform our food shed, such as organic gardening, chicken keeping and beekeeping, preserving the harvest, saving seeds, building living soil, catching and using rainwater, a whole wealth of skills, drawing on those with the knowledge in our community and really shining the spotlight on them so that others can learn from them.
Stage two.
All right. So stage two, like I said, builds upon the previous stage of starting out. So now that you've tried a bunch of things and you've seen how your community has responded to that, you've seen how well you can manage that with the resources that you have, you see who's showing up, you can now focus in on what's working and build and strengthen the foundations for further growth. There's a quote that I love and repeatedly butcher from Henry David Thoreau, who said something like, "You've built your castles in the air. That's great. That's where they should be. Now go and put the foundations under them."
Uh-huh. Yeah.
And so he's saying it's great that we have this lofty vision, that we have these lofty ideals, but we need to ground them in real practicality. And so that's what the deepening stage is about. And one of the ways that we do that is by focusing in, maybe cutting away some of the things that are not working, and establishing a track record for success. And this is, I think, very important. When I started Transition Sarasota, I thought this is such a great idea. And I can talk about it so well that everybody is just going to want to join in on this right off the bat. And I would go and reach out to other related nonprofits in the area, to grant funding institutions, and I would get again and again the cold shoulder. Mm-hmm. But an interesting thing started happening after we started proving our ideas, that we put some practical projects into play. We showed that they were working. We showed that we could run them well, that they were benefiting the community as a whole. Those same organizations and institutions started coming knocking on Transition Sarasota's door saying, "Can we partner with you? Can we work with you?"
Could you give us an example or two?
Well, I don't want to name names here.
No, I don't mean I mean of the projects that you did that got attention.
Yeah. Okay, great.
We'll name names later, right?
So the key project for Transition Sarasota in this deepening stage was our Suncoast Gleaning Project, which is a project that is still in existence. So it's in its 7th season now.
Wow.
And what we do is we go out to local farms and we harvest any surplus produce that they might have for local food banks and the food insecure in our community. And to date, we've donated well over 200,000 pounds of local organic produce, which I think is a substantial number in itself. Mm-hmm. But perhaps even more importantly, it has, I believe, inspired our local food bank, which serves a whole 2-county area and distributes upwards of 7 million pounds of food a year. Wow. To really focus in on local produce, yeah, and to get interested in working with more local farmers, which were 2 things that were not really on their radar when we started this program initially.
Right.
And so this story continues to be written, but it was an excellent first practical project for us for a number of reasons. One is it engaged a lot of people. It brought a lot of people out to the farms to dig in the dirt, to socialize with each other, to have great conversations, to feel the satisfaction of going out on a Monday morning for 2 hours and seeing the boxes pile up of sometimes 2,000-3,000 pounds of produce. and then to go home with a bag of produce for themselves.
Ah,
So it provided a door into the rest of Transition Sarasota, into the rest of our food localization efforts, that was really powerful. And in the wider community, it was something that resonated with people from across the political spectrum.
mhm.
No matter what their ideology was, they could see this is a practical project that's bringing real benefit to our community, that
Right.
it's feeding the hungry, giving them nutritious food that they may not otherwise have access to. So that built a lot of goodwill in the community, started attracting media attention, and also led to some of our first grant receipts
Uh-huh.
and some of our first successful crowdfunding campaigns to bring some resources into the organization.
So it had an awareness raising component to it. The fact that you were doing it at all was helped to raise awareness.
Absolutely. Absolutely. We would talk about how hunger and obesity and diabetes are now currently sitting side by side in a lot of cases, even though it seems paradoxical, and that local food for those in need could be a solution to both of those
Right.
issues.
So in your gleaning, how many people volunteered during a season, for instance?
Yeah, so in our current season, we have anywhere from maybe 20 people to we had 65 people turn out one week on a
Uh-huh.
Monday morning at 9 o'clock in the morning to a farm to harvest produce. And
Ah,
we've had over 200 different gleaners come out so far this season. We have a few weeks left here. We've donated over 50,000 pounds now this season. It's been our biggest one yet. And many people come every single week
uh-huh.
without fail.
But I'm sure you get some people that only come,
Yep.
sporadically, but it sounds like over a season, hundreds of people are involved in
Mm-hmm.
gleaning with you.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. And many more involved indirectly
Indirectly, how?
as recipients of the produce,
Yeah, right.
people at the food bank, volunteers and workers at the food bank, people who read articles about it. Yep.
So other organizations and individuals, I assume, seeing that this was going on, began to get their interest and to change their attitudes towards what you're doing.
Yeah, absolutely. So that very much has been happening on the local level, and a great example of that on the statewide level is our Florida Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services recently announced that they're launching a gleaning pilot program in 5 counties. I'm
Ah,
not sure whether that's happening this year because it was just announced recently, and our seasons are backwards from what many of your viewers may be used to up north. We're kind of shutting down for the season, but it's something that's in development, and I think shows the power that a relatively small project in one community can have as the influence of it ripples out over time.
yeah,
If
yeah.
it's particularly if it's done really well.
Very good. So what's the next stage?
So the next stage is about connecting. And of course, we are connecting from the very start. But what's different about stage 3 is about we are now able to reach out beyond the usual suspects. So many folks may have experienced this if you've been involved in local food efforts for a while, or transition efforts, or any other kind of grassroots efforts around sustainability, that you see the same people kind of turning up again and again.
Yeah.
And you kind of hit a ceiling on your participation. You get pigeonholed, and it's really the work of deepening that opens up the door to this connecting stage where you're able to connect more broadly with the community, with local businesses, with local government, attracting serious media attention, bringing in a more diverse range of supporters, diverse in all senses of the word, and really moving your local food efforts to the center of the community's life. That may not have been completed in this stage, but that's the impulse here, is that we're moving it towards the center. Here in Sarasota, there's a lot of talk right now about high rises and traffic congestion, development on wetland sites, and changes in rezoning. My belief is that local food should be as important a conversation, if not more, than any of those other things. And the if not more is because it has a lot of more potential beneficial effects than just simply fighting off what we don't want. It's not quite there yet, but we've certainly advanced the conversation and moved it closer to the center through our work of connecting. And this, we really, again, followed in your footsteps, Michael, to a large degree, launching Eat Local Week and our Eat Local Resource Guide and Directory with your help in 2011. And both of those projects, I think, are great examples of connecting, because they bring together a lot of different elements. Like our Eat Local Week would bring together over 30 partners each year, different restaurants, different local farmers, different retailers, local government agencies, local universities, all bringing our voices together, showing the community all that our local food system has to offer, and really amplifying that voice and getting people to pay attention to local food issues.
Could you kind of describe the food landscape in Sarasota and the area? I mean, what's the situation there with food? What kind of political policy environment are you working in there? That kind of thing.
Yeah. So on the Strolling of the Heifers Locavore Index, Florida, I believe, ranked number 50 out of 51.
Wow, yeah.
Last year. I think maybe only in front of Texas. So Sarasota is not a great exception to that. However, one of the things that inspired me to move back to Sarasota and try to do this work here was that there were already little signs of life starting to emerge.
Yes.
Slow food group, a permaculture teacher that moved to town, some new farms starting up. So that has greatly progressed over time. We measured through our Eat Local Guide and the number of listings in our Eat Local Guide that the number of local food related businesses in a 4-county area, including Sarasota and the adjoining counties, were growing at about 33% a year between 2011 and 2016. So we were starting from a fraction of 1%.
Yes.
So we still have a long way to go, but it shows that things are improving. And local food, you asked about the policy aspect of this, and I find local food to not be as divisive an issue as some of the other things that transition typically works with, like energy, reducing dependence on fossil fuels, that there is more of a bipartisan consensus, if you will, around local food actually being a really good thing. One of the first years that we did the Eat Local Week, we had a Republican state representative send us a letter of thanks for doing what we're doing. And the county commission in Sarasota which is always 100% Republican, has added policies to our county comprehensive plan, significant policies supporting the implementation of more local food, particularly on county-owned lands, including the establishment of local farmers markets and community gardens on county-owned lands. So I wouldn't say that they really get it yet. They probably still see local food as this kind of niche thing that's very small, that's not really causing any harm, and it's a nice thing. Everybody likes it, so why not support it anyway? Maybe if we become more successful, we'll start to run into more resistance.
Maybe, but the great thing about, you know, starting from near zero is that any progress at all is a tremendous improvement.
Yes, and it's very important to have and be able to show progress to keep up the morale of everybody who's involved. Because as I was, reading some more of your book this morning, saying this is potentially a multi-generational project, that we will not necessarily see the full fruits of the work that we're doing now. I really believe that. And
we didn't used to think that. We thought we could get this done in 10 years.
Yeah, it's a big thing. I mean, we're really trying to change the course of history here. And that is not a small thing at all.
Not a small thing. So, okay. So connecting, any more about connecting
Yeah, I would just say that doing this connecting work very thoroughly, that it may take a lot longer than we thought at first to complete this stage. That, we might think, well, we'll do connecting for 6 months and then we'll be able to move on to the next stage. I found that personally not to be true in my work with Transition Sarasota. And I think that Transition Sarasota really is still working on connecting to be able to open the door to the next stage.
Right. And the next stage is?
It is building.
And that's my favorite part.
Yes, it is. I think for most of us, it's our favorite part. It's the delicious and sweet dessert that we are looking to eat first. But important that we start with our vegetables. So doing the work of stage 1, 2, and 3 then opens the door to building. As I said before, if we try to skip stages and try to do real big projects right off the bat, chances are, particularly if we don't have any resources, but even if we have lots of money and social capital at our disposal, we'll probably find only limited success, because we need to raise awareness in our community. We need to kind of build broad-based support for these ideas. We need to build the relationships in the community that will enable some of these bigger projects to happen, and to start moving from what many local food and transition efforts are in the early stages, and I think rightly so, opportunistic. We go where the windows of opportunity have opened for us. But by the time we get to building, we start to feel that, one, that's not enough, that just tackling this issue in a piecemeal fashion is not enough. And by this stage, if we've really done our thorough work, we have the resources to begin to think and act more strategically. So to look at the big picture of what our community needs to have a truly resilient local food shed, and what are the key pieces that we need to put in place now. whether that's a food hub or a new farmer cultivation center, or a slow money investment club, or local food shed study, or community plan, or certification and branding for local food businesses. So we begin to not just go where our strengths are, but now we're strong enough to go where with what is really needed at the moment.
Yes, right.
Yeah.
So that's stage 4 is a long one.
Yes. So in some sense, it's only the beginning,
Yes.
even though it may take a while to get here, because there's a tremendous amount of work to do in starting new entrepreneurial ventures, running multifaceted campaigns, maybe around a central goal, aspirational goal, like the Denver, Colorado goal of the 20% by 2020, or maybe something a little more realistic. And yeah, facilitating community planning processes. And we tried to take on, in about the last year that I was doing Transition Sarasota before I moved on to Transition US, I really tried to get some of these bigger building projects happening, slow money efforts happening, a new local food shed study for the area, and certification and branding for local food businesses came up big time in the wake of an article in early 2016 put out by the Tampa Bay Times called Farm to Fable.
Yes, famous series of stories. Yes.
So hopefully some of your viewers have read that.
Oh yeah.
It was exposing, first off, restaurants that were saying that they were sourcing local produce but weren't, and then perhaps even more shockingly, farmers, or so-called farmers at local farmers markets, who are passing off the produce that they were selling as their own, but they actually didn't grow anything at all. They didn't even have a farm. And just straight up lying about these things. And I think a lot of us who have been involved in the local food movement knew that there was some of this local washing going on, suspected that it was fairly pervasive, but these series of investigative reports really blew the lid off the whole thing, and
Yes.
made the general public hyper aware of, if somebody says, we source only the most fresh, most local ingredients whenever possible, that is a very dubious statement. So I started to see that Transition Sarasota could play a useful role working through our Eat Local Guide and our 10% local food shift pledge to start certifying local food businesses at different levels of local sourcing for restaurants or retailers, for producers certifying that they're actually producing those products that they say that they're growing within a certain geographical area, and building back trust in the word local, maintaining the integrity of that word local, and providing aspirational benchmarks for local food businesses, say certifying a restaurant at 10%, 25%, 50% local sourcing, and that adding value to their businesses, and the ones that are not doing that, wanting to step up their commitment to local sourcing in order to get that kind of certification and branding. Now, that sort of thing takes a lot of know-how. It takes a lot of connections and trust with local food businesses and the community in general. And it takes a very significant amount of funding. Started thinking through how this would happen. Tremendous amount of work. We would have to have at least one full-time staff person on that, if not more. And so it didn't get off the ground during my time with Transition
Mm,
Sarasota.
mm.
Hopefully, this is something that will, the seed has been planted and it will come to fruition in the future. Um, but what I realized from that, rather than just getting frustrated and saying, oh, Sarasota wasn't ready for it yet, this is such a good idea, why didn't people jump all over this? Saying, okay, taking responsibility for it, saying, okay, was there more deepening and connecting work that
Uh-huh.
we needed to do? If we had a sharper focus for what we're doing, maybe that would free up some more resources to begin to at least flesh out this idea and put out more proposals for funding. If we did more connecting work, maybe there would be more businesses just ready to jump on board. So
Mm.
I think that's really important, to not push blame onto others, but in doing this work to see, well, I can't control what other people do. I can't control what my community does, but how can I go about this in a smarter way? And I think maybe often the answer, if we're stuck at a certain point in our evolution, is looking back at the stages that we already thought we had surpassed and say, okay, what is unfinished here?
I'd like to go back to stage 3 a little bit, the
Mm-hmm.
connecting, and ask you to give us some examples of projects that a group might work
Mm-hmm.
on stage 3.
Yeah. So I already mentioned Eat Local Week,
Right?
our
Yeah.
Eat Local Guide, which was basically a detailed map of the local food system, really showing everybody for the first time a full picture of what was out there and how it was growing and changing over time. And by doing that, by providing free listings for all manner of local food businesses, it was up to 265 by 2016, spread across 21 different categories. We were building a lot of relationships with
Right.
all manner of local food businesses and all manner of different kinds of institutions. And something else we got involved in Sarasota in 2015 was a 10-year review of our county's comprehensive plan,
Ah.
and making additional recommendations for inclusion in the next updated version of the comprehensive plan. Another example of this would be something like a food shed alliance. Um, Different projects that bring lots of different elements of the local food system together, lots of different elements of the community together to start working with each other. I think that that's a great role that people who might be watching this summit, people who identify as local food shed catalysts or transition initiative leaders, can play, is being that convener that brings everybody
Yeah.
together, that speaks out that this is not about territoriality. It's not about, we have this little teeny tiny pie and we're fighting over who gets the biggest slice of it, which is something that I've definitely seen here in Sarasota.
Huh.
But providing the perspective that what we're trying to do is grow the local food pie a lot bigger. Um, maybe shading out the global industrial food pie, to mix my metaphors here. Uh, but not to fight over who has the biggest piece of a very small pie, but that we're trying to grow the pie together so that
Right.
everybody has enough. And I think
That
that's a key thing that we can do.
that triggers a question for me that was in the back of my mind a little earlier. What what's agriculture like in that part of Florida? What do you
Mm-hmm.
see in the agricultural landscape? What are the primary crops? What's happening agriculture wise?
Yeah. There's a wide variety, as I'm sure there are in most places, particularly at the local level. If we're talking about commodity crops, Florida grows a lot of citrus, although we're growing a lot less of it now due to citrus greening. That's a major issue. Lots of tomatoes, lots of green beans, but at the local level, it's more varied, as you would expect. One of the things that I've noticed over the last 7 or so years is that the different kinds of products that are available on the local market have greatly increased in diversity. We used to only see citrus and vegetables primarily.
Right.
Now we're seeing a lot more of a great abundance of tropical fruits. One of the best things about living in this part of the country, being able to have avocados and mangoes and lychees and all sorts of other amazing tropical fruit treats. But we're also seeing more edible mushrooms and more pastured poultry. And we're even seeing local sea salt come on the market.
Oh, that's interesting.
And all sorts of different local food products like that. So as more vegetable producers have come up, people have been starting to look at, like, where are the gaps and starting to fill those.
How about livestock production?
Well, the greatest role that livestock plays in Florida is to get a tax exemption by putting a single cow on your unoccupied land. So there is cattle raising happening here. There's actually a very large, I think it's the largest in the southeastern United States, largest pastured bison operation called Three Sons Ranch down in Punta Gorda, south of us. So there are things like that are happening, but I wouldn't say that's a big part of our local food system as yet.
Yeah. Are there big industrial feedlots, that kind of thing down there?
No, you don't see the CAFOs out down here like you might see in some places in Colorado. There is a history of cattle ranching here, but there's not as much of that kind of heavy feedlot cattle raising.
So how do you feel? I'm asking you about Sarasota, but also extrapolating, to a larger picture. But how do you feel about what you've been able to accomplish around local food in Sarasota to date, and what the outlook is for the future?
Well, I always have very, very high, unrealistically high expectations. So in a sense, I had hoped that I would have accomplished more by this time. And maybe other people out there listening to this feel the same way.
I think many do.
But I think it's really important to recognize that, like what I talked about with the gleaning project, that even a small project that's working primarily with one farm and a few others on an occasional basis can really ripple out throughout the community and statewide and even further. And so I think that a lot of the relationship building work that we've done with Transition Sarasota is absolutely essential, and you can't really quantify it.
Sure.
But now we have all sorts of farmers and chefs and all kinds of people who are involved in our local food system who are now used to working together, seeing themselves as a movement. And the community recognizes that there is a movement that's happening here, that it can provide lots of benefits to the community, and that it there's a lot of energy and a lot of value in this local food work. So all those things, again, can't be quantified. They're
Yeah.
not bricks and mortar. You can't put them in a spreadsheet, but they're extremely important. And I think that for anybody else who feels like their expectations have not been met as of yet, I would reflect on that, about how important that work is, and that we're planting the seeds for maybe not mighty oaks, but maybe mighty avocados.
Well, it strikes me that if you hadn't responded to this calling, if
Mhm.
you hadn't gone back to Sarasota, then maybe none of this would be happening down there at all.
Yeah, it's hard to say. I mean, I
Yeah,
think that there's a lot of great people working in the local food movement here. There's a lot of great organizations involved in this. And I think the role that Transition Sarasota played and continues to play, that's a little bit unique, is this role of bringing everything together,
mm,
and showing the movement as a whole, rather than just focusing on this issue or that issue, but pulling all the threads together. And I think that that is a really crucial issue, and being able to tell the story of the awakening food shed, as I know you've called it in the past. I think that that's really a crucial role. And I don't know if there's, maybe some people would argue with me on this, but I don't know if there's another organization that has played that role
yeah,
as fully as Transition Sarasota has.
and maybe no one else could. It seems to me that you responded to a need,
Mm-hmm.
and you acted on that, and that's really important. And I think that's part of what we're encouraging participants in this summit to think about. I think many people feel called to this work,
Mm-hmm.
but don't necessarily respond to that calling. And so I think your story is very important, because you've taken this on in a place that's probably not the easiest to do local food work. We feel that way too in Boulder. But I don't think it's easy anywhere.
Mm-hmm.
But just the response that's coming from your inner being is just so important in the world. And we want to encourage others who are feeling those kinds of stirrings to respect those feelings and respond to those callings. We're all greatly needed these days.
Yeah, and I think it's tremendously rewarding, this work as well. Even if we don't see the full fruits of it
Yeah,
immediately, that this work really calls us to grow as people,
yeah,
which I think is incredibly valuable in so many different ways. It calls us to grow, and we meet some of the most amazing people through this work.
yeah.
Really, some of the most incredible individuals on the planet today. Um,
So maybe you could tell us a little bit about how you feel you have changed being involved in this work.
well, I think I'm a lot more realistic than I used to be. I used to be a little bit more idealistic, and thinking that my good intentions and the fact that I did feel this as a sort of calling, and inspiration, would be basically everything that I need to carry me through. And
Uh,
I still believe that that's true in a sense. I think that it is really true, that that's the core of this, and that's what sustains us through, even when the work is difficult. That sense of a real commitment. I know the poet Rilke said something like, a calling is a thing that you can't not do.
Yes.
And so I feel transition in local food is a thing that I can't not do. And that really has seen me through this. But I don't expect it to be as easy as I thought it might be at the outset. And I also realize that I have so much more to learn,
Mm.
you know, in all different ways, you know, from the types of plants that grow really well in this area
Yeah.
to how to deal with extremely difficult people in group situations. Um, the learning is absolutely endless. And I think maybe deepening patience, um, yeah, an ability to see the big picture and what's really essential now.
Mm.
Because oftentimes we can get really excited about something and just throw it out into the world. Um, and I think that that's really important to do at the beginning so that you don't get stuck. But I think at a certain point, you start to realize, okay, you know, this is a compelling idea, but you can kind of see all the implications that it has, and you can choose to focus your energies and your time and resources more wisely over time. And I think that's something that's happened.
Very good. So, stage 5.
All right. Yeah. So as I said in the beginning, this stage 5 is more speculative. It's really, you know, what might be possible if we do the first 4 stages really well all over the place. If we have a network of thriving initiatives all over this country, all over the world, that are really transforming their local communities, their local food systems. And I think that's stepping up to national and international stages. Not saying that the national and international are more important than the local. I actually think it's the reverse, that
Mm.
without these thriving initiatives on the local level, any kind of change at national or international levels that we try to make is going to be hollow.
Mm.
Because one, we won't have proven that our ideas can work, so a lot of people will be still skeptical. We haven't raised the awareness about the need for it, and there won't be anyone there at the local level to actually do the work of implementation. We can pass all sorts of great policies, and if things don't change on a, you know, quarter acre by quarter acre scale, we're not going to have real change.
Mm.
It's just going to be a bunch of ideas. And I think that's maybe something that the climate movement could think about as well.
Uh-huh.
Um, so yeah, it's really having this local work happening on the ground, a really fine-grained level. And if we can do that, then we are not just in one community, but in our country or in the world as a whole. We are moving local food really back to the center
Mm.
of cultural life.
Yes.
And we have to remind ourselves that this current way that our our agricultural systems work, our food systems work, the way we eat, um, it is completely anomalous in human history, and that for the vast majority of the time humans have been on the planet, we have ate entirely local and organic food, and that this has really been at the center of our existence,
Yes.
and that it is a relationship of connection with the earth and with
Yes.
each other. And it is as well as being a very practical thing, a very deeply spiritual thing as well.
Yes.
And having that transform our culture, um, I think is a real possibility. We've done it before. We can do it again.
It's the stage 5 vision.
Yes, it
Yeah.
is the stage 5 vision. And, in that way, local food, one, it's connected to everything else. And two is it's really a means for a kind of cultural, social, spiritual awakening
Mm.
in terms of our connection with all of life and with each other. We don't necessarily talk about that at county commission meetings or in our
Not,
brochures.
not at the Kiwanis meetings, no.
Not at the Kiwanis meeting, but I think for those of us who have this, burning passion for this work, that's what really fuels it at a deep. That's what I suspect.
Yes.
What really fuels it at a deep level is this recognition of the deeper transformative power of
Yeah.
local food.
It's interesting that your own journey really, I mean, your initial impulse was around climate change.
Mm-hmm.
And as we've watched the environmental climate change movement over the last several decades, um, we see that we haven't gotten very far. We didn't get global warming stopped. It's at the point of running away from us at this point.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and food localization, sometimes we saw that as a way to help mitigate
Mm-hmm.
climate change, and also to respond to the obvious depletion of fossil resources, fuel and water especially. Um, but now it's been very recently that we've been learning about the impact of global warming on food production capacity.
Mm-hmm.
And the news is really not good at all.
Mm-hmm.
If we could be facing conservative estimate is 30 to 40% reduction in food production capacity by the end of the century. A more bold projection might be to say that we could lose half of our production by mid-century. It changes things. It changes the conversation about local food, because I think one of the things that we have missed in the local food movement is the ability to generate any sense of urgency around local food. I mean, it's a great idea. Who could be opposed to it? It makes everybody feel good, but we could never quite get enough traction because there was no sense that, oh yeah, this is something that we have to do. But now, with this newer understanding about what will happen to our food supply, which will affect our industrial food supply more than anything else, it really gives us a jolt, and I think can really fuel the local food movement and bring us to a whole new level of impact and effectiveness and scale. And that's what we're hoping will come out of the not just this summit, but the conversation that gets started out of this summit. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
You started to say something. Yeah.
Oh, I was just going to say that In addition to my work with Transition US, I also currently work part-time at a local organic farm, and
Ah,
we've certainly been uh, seeing the early effects of climate change with the season moving a week or 2 weeks in one direction or another because the weather is
yeah.
consistently getting hotter.
Uh-huh.
And I think farmers are the most sensitive barometers
Yes.
of what's happening with climate change. And I think, just from my direct experience, I think they don't really know what to do.
Yes.
They're gradually adapting or trying to adapt over time. But I don't think that there's, at least in the farmers I know, there's not a big, um, master plan for how they're going to adapt to changes brought about by global warming. So, and maybe that's okay, but I do think we need to talk about it more
Yeah.
and be willing to look at the issue, even though, it's an uncomfortable one. We don't have easy answers to it.
That's right.
And, but we need to begin to grapple with it, even if it's very awkwardly at first. Start really seriously thinking about.
It's back to awareness raising.
Mm-hmm. Always.
uh, I I've been really encouraged by some of the young people that we see coming into the local food movement.
Mm.
And this deep passion and calling that they feel. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
it's extraordinary, and the energy
Mm-hmm.
that they have around it. And the words coming out of their mouths sometimes are so clear. It says, I realize that my mission in life is to grow food for people.
Mm-hmm.
To hear people saying that, it's thrilling, and
Yeah.
it tells me that there is an evolutionary impulse that we're beginning to see now,
Mm-hmm.
that is very, very powerful, still in its early stages, but it gives me some confidence that this process of food localization actually may turn out to be a natural evolutionary process of healing and regeneration, and
Mm-hmm.
that it may turn out to be the most important thing happening on the planet.
I certainly think so.
Well, Don, anything else that you'd like to add before we've been talking for a while? Gosh, uh,
Yeah. No,
I
this
did.
has been great. And yeah, I just appreciate you hosting me here, and for everybody out there who's watching this, taking the time to think and learn and argue with what's been said, and for all the great work that you do in your local communities.
And tell us again about the Transition US National Gathering, when and where, and how people can find out.
Yeah, so it's going to be in St. Paul, Minnesota, at the end of July. And it's going to start on the 27th with 2 days of intensive trainings. There's going to be then 2 days of workshops on the 29th and 30th. And then we're going to have a movement strategy session retreat for the 2 days after that. We have
Aha.
some great keynote speakers, including Richard Heinberg, that I believe is also going to be presenting as part of this local food summit.
Yes.
And Michael Brownlee is going to be teaching a workshop on igniting the local food revolution.
Yes.
So you can find about all that more at transitionus.org. And
Great.
I hope
And
that you'll join.
what's the registration fee?
The standard registration fee is $250, which is the price that it takes for us to put on this workshop. Uh, but there are opportunities to apply for scholarship and work trade positions, and there's also opportunities to sponsor another person coming to the gathering.
Uh-huh. Is camping available?
No camping, but we have very inexpensive dorm lodging at McAllister College, where we're going to be hosting the event, and also at two other local universities.
Well, it's the very first national gathering of Transition US, so it's an important event, and I look forward to being there and being able to spend some time with you.
Yes, well, I'm really looking forward to that, and we're happy to have you.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Don. I
Thank
appreciate your contribution to the local food summit, and we'll be seeing you soon.
Great.
Okay, thank you. Bye-bye.